We've been looking at the key components that are within an FBA. We are now going to focus on one of the last important components of an FBA, which is the hypothesis statement. Basically, all the work we've been doing so far will accumulate in this hypothesis statement. As a reminder, the key components in the FBA are an operational definition of the behavior, indirect assessment data, direct observational data, and a hypothesis statement. When we dig into what a hypothesis statement is, the definition would be a summary that outlines the pattern of antecedents and consequences relevant to a student's target behavior, and it's a statement that suggests the likely function of the behavior. So if we were to pull this definition apart, because it is a little bit wordy, it is a statement that's going to summarize any patterns we notice and what happens before or after a student's behavior. And it's going to suggest the likely function beneath the behavior. So there's kind of two components. What do we notice about what happens before the behavior or after that's important to consider? And then also, what is the underlying function that we would best guess be the function of that behavior? After you conduct the indirect and descriptive or direct assessments is when you should create a hypothesis. One mistake teams can make is by jumping too quickly into trying to develop a hypothesis statement. The purpose of an FBA, remember, is a fact-finding mission. Our goal is to dig and find any information that would help us understand a student's behavior. So if you jump to a hypothesis too quickly, you're kind of missing that fact-finding mission and all of the collection of important resources so that we make sure we have the best possible hypothesis we could. There is a specific process to go through when developing a hypothesis for an FBA. First, you would identify skill deficits. Here, you're going to examine any data or evidence you have for specific deficits that may impact student behavior. They could be deficits in academics, communication, social skills, executive functioning, and we want to make sure we address these in some way. Are there interventions that could be put in place, lessons that need to be taught? Then we will summarize the context. To do this, we will need to examine again all the data we've collected for patterns regarding when and where the target behavior is most likely to occur. So, for example, if you have a student that has behaviors that are unwanted during specials or itinerant classes because they tend to have a little bit less structure or a new teacher or they're there less often, so they get less practice in that setting, that's really important to know. Similarly, if you have a student who is always acting out during ELA, but does fine in math and science, that tells us something about the student behavior. So it's really important to know the context. It goes deeper than just the class they're in, though, because we might be able to find connections between the task that's being asked of them or the setup of the activity that's going on. So, for example, a student may struggle more in a whole group setting or a small group setting or during independent work. Similarly, we might see a student who struggles more on Mondays or the first day back from a weekend, or a student who struggles the most during the afternoon because they're tired or their medication has worn off. There's so many ways that just knowing the context can tell us a lot about a student and their behavior. The third step is to identify any relevant setting events. So remember, this is the setting event is kind of that underlying story that's going on, conditions that might make the behavior more likely to occur. Maybe it's a lack of sleep or being at a specific parent's house or missing the bus in the morning, whatever it is, knowing what that underlying setting event is will help you to not overgeneralize about a student's behavior. Next, we will evaluate patterns in antecedents. The antecedent is what happens before the target behavior. So we're going to go back and look at our ABC data, our referral forms, our interviews, and try to determine if there's some sort of pattern occurring that might trigger the behavior. After that, we will then evaluate patterns and consequences, examining what tends to change, meaning what do they get, what do they lose, what happens after the behavior that we're targeting. Using this information, again, we can generalize and try to determine if any specific consequence seems to reinforce the behavior. Remember, consequence is not punishment here. It's anything that happens after the behavior. And then the last step will be to hypothesize the function, where we will take all of this information and make our best guess on what would be maintaining the target behavior or making it continue to happen. So we're going to practice this as a guided conversation. So first I will show you the formula, which is this. This is a hypothesis statement formula. And it goes during whatever context, when an antecedent occurs, the student does the target behavior, which results in a consequence. It is hypothesized that the student engages in target behavior again in order to function. This is more likely to occur when whatever the setting event might be. So I'm going to give you some information about a made-up student named Liam, and we're going to walk through what this would look like to fill in this formula. So our student is Liam. He's a fourth grader. The referral form that the team received said that Liam is well liked by his peers and often joking around with them. He enjoys being active. His grades have recently started declining, though, mostly as a result of missing assignments and a lack of participation. His teachers report he is often off task and constantly needs redirection and reminder. Liam's behavior takes the form of verbalizations, jokes, conversations with peers, comments back to the teacher. So that was our referral form for Liam. Based on that information, the team looked into this situation. And this is what they've determined. They've determined to complete an FBA because they took that referral. And they also kind of came up with a couple of things that were almost red flags that made them think we do need to dig deeper here. Liam is now exhibiting an extended pattern of frequent off-task disruptive behavior consistently within classrooms. So this is not just a one-off thing, it's happening consistently across settings. Previous attempts to intervene with Liam, such as redirection, preferential seating, targeted reinforcement, using the school-wide PBIS system tokens, were not effective at all. Liam's frequency of his verbalizations are causing increasing disruption to the classroom instructional environment. And he is beginning to impact his peers as well. So not only his own academic progress, but that of his peers. So we can see how this is something that should become more concerning when we add these details on top of the referral that we already had. So based on all of that, the team has decided they are going to complete an FBA. The team defined Liam's behavior operationally as Liam engages in verbal and nonverbal activities that deviate from established classroom norms for expected activities or tasks. So this is a really broad operational definition of Liam's behavior. So what the team decided to do, which I really love to see, is create examples and non-examples of what would be considered this targeted behavior. Some examples of engaging in verbal or nonverbal activities that deviate from the classroom expectations would be making jokes, talking back to the teacher, leaving seat and touching other students' work or materials, initiating conversations with peers unrelated to whatever the current lesson or task is. You can see how those would all fall into that category of verbal or nonverbal activities that deviate from what is expected during the academic task or lesson. Some non examples, things that would not count as this behavior, would be taking a sensory break with permission, talking with peers about on topic topics. So he is on topic, he is focused in on the lesson. Maybe he's still having fun, but he's getting the work done. Leaving his seat with permission or according to the classroom routines or norms. So if the teacher has established with the class that to use the bathroom, you don't need to ask, you just need to sign out, that's not an example of him deviating from the classroom norms. Once the team had that operational definition of his behavior, they collected the following items for indirect assessment: a parent interview, student interview, teacher interview from both a math teacher and an art teacher, teacher rating scales, so a quick Likert scale survey from all academic and special teachers, attendance history, and academic history. The team also collected the following items for direct observation or descriptive assessment. There was a direct observation during math class from a BCBA that had not previously worked with Liam. And there was also a direct observation from the counselor during a social studies class. I love that they didn't just observe during one specific topic or classroom setting. And I also love that they utilize two different staff who have some behavioral expertise to do these observations. So, again, we're making sure that we don't have any underlying bias or subjectivity by utilizing multiple observations from different practitioners. On both of these observations, an ABC chart was completed, and that's important because that's your antecedent behavior consequence chart. So, the FBA team meets and completes the following chart to develop a hypothesis for the function of Liam's target behavior, which again, remember, is verbal or nonverbal activities that deviate from established classroom norms for expected activities. Step 1, identify all skill deficits. The team determined there were none. Liam was not exhibiting any specific skill deficits related to his behavior. 2, summarize the context. Liam is more likely to demonstrate the target behavior during whole group instruction or independent work. That's important to know. There was no specific setting like classroom that it occurred in, though, so it wasn't targeted specifically on math class or ELA. But they did notice that it happened during whole group instruction and independent work. The third step, identify any relevant setting events. There were none identified. There was nothing underlying that was really important for the team to consider that might be impacting the behavior occurring. 4, evaluate patterns and antecedents. The teacher delivers instruction to the whole class or directs students to complete work independently. So Liam is going to do this anytime that a teacher delivers instruction to the whole class, which, if you can imagine, happens a lot during a class period, or when the students are directed to complete work independently. When we evaluated patterns and consequences, the team noticed the teacher verbally would redirect Liam, but also peers would respond to Liam verbally and non-verbally. So maybe they would laugh or talk back, or maybe they would just smile or look at Liam. Those are all examples of ways that we reinforce behavior. The teacher was giving him attention by redirecting him. The students were giving him attention verbally and non-verbally. Those are all examples of consequences. And then finally, if we had to hypothesize the function, we would say attention from peers or adults. So this is not a student who's targeting one type of attention. They are getting attention from anybody. So we're going to take this chart then, and we would fill in that formula that we created. During whole group instruction or independent work, that's the context. When the teacher is addressing the whole class, that's the antecedent. The student engages in verbal and nonverbal activities that are unrelated to instruction or the assigned work. That was the target behavior, which results in verbal redirection and responses from peers. That's the consequence. It is hypothesized that the student engages in unrelated activities. Again, that's a short summary of the targeted behavior in order to gain adult and peer attention. And you notice we've removed the setting event because there wasn't one that was determined for Liam. So what I would do as a team member here is just clean this up some so that it was easier for the team, family, student even to really understand. And that would look like this. During whole group instruction or independent work, when the teacher is addressing the whole class, Liam engages in verbal and nonverbal activities that are unrelated to instruction or the assigned work, which results in verbal redirection and responses from peers. It is hypothesized that the student engages in unrelated activities in order to gain adult and peer attention. This is a well rounded, well written hypothesis statement that would be present within an FBA.